Ni hao, Kalan.
Is it going? No.
Hi, welcome to Everyday Storytelling. How are you doing today? We are going to be reading the Bible, and we are not doing the joke of the day, unfortunately. Then we are going to be doing the synopsis. Then we are going to be reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Hi, how are you doing? I don't know why, but either Facebook changed their thing, the live stream, or there's something messed up. So I don't know what the deal is, but I just have this little tiny itty bitty, actually that's better, but anyway. All right, a picture that I get to use now, so I don't know why. All right, so here is, as usual, we will put on, we're on Genesis chapter 37. We get to read about Joseph today. So, and I'm actually writing a book that is, well, anyway, we'll just leave it up to, you guys can read it for yourselves. Genesis chapter 37, the English Standard Version of the Bible. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us, or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where are they pasturing, or where they are pasturing the flock?" And the man said, "They have gone away, for I have heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, throw him in this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty, there was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, Let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters, indicating that he has more than just that one, Dinah, I believe, rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. Chapter 28. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua. He took her and went in to her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. So he called his name in the first one, E-R, and she called his name Onan, the second one. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chetzib when she bore him. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go in your brother's wife, and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went in to his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up," for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, and he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face, he turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come in to you," for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come in to me?" He answered, "I will send you a young goat from the flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She replied, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." So he gave them to her and went in to her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her, and he asked the men of the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside?" And they said, "No cult prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Also the men of the place said, "No cult prostitute has been here." And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Whoever Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out and let her be burned. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, she is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb, and when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, this one came first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, what a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward, his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. That's the end of chapter 38, which is a little confusing in our tradition. I'm told that there is a commentary about from a rabbi, a Jewish rabbi, that makes it make more sense, but I haven't read that. So hopefully, if that means anything to you, then please let me know. And because that chapter is very confusing, and I think even a lot of Christian preachers, I think John MacArthur very famously said that chapter should just be taken out of the Bible or something like that. So anyway, so now it is time. We're going to have our synopsis, and don't quote me on that. It might not have been John MacArthur. Here comes Kimberly to give us the synopsis.
The
Here she is.
so
Oh, Kimberly's working on her edition pictures.
not sure if you can see it. It's on this side. I'm pretty sure you can't see it right now. But it's a cat. Well, Easton, Chrissy. Sorry, the dogs decided it was time for them to get through the narrow space. So what happened in the last chapter was Chrissy. What happened in the last few chapters was after a few about a week of Captain Nemo being absent, he gives an invitation for them to go underwater hunting. And they have like these super cool water guns that will kill anything in one shot, no matter where it hits. And they have like scuba diving suits and flashlights. And they have like even semi-automatic guns for their water gun thing. So a bunch of stuff that did not exist when the book was made, as Jad says. And there was some sort of big fish that they were about to find, right, Dad? That they found? Yeah. I don't. Yeah,
Oh,
they. Yeah,
were
they
out there
passed
for a
out.
long time. So Jules Verne was wrong on his scuba diving length of time that they last, because as far as I know, they only last about an hour, the tanks. So, but that's okay. We'll let that one slide. Okay, so here is chapter 17, 4,000 Leagues Under the Pacific. The first word is the. The next morning, the 18th of November, I had quite recovered from my fatigues of the day before, and I went up onto the platform just as the second lieutenant was uttering his daily phrase. I was admiring the magnificent aspect of the ocean when Captain Nemo appeared. He did not seem to be aware of my presence and began a series of astronomical observations. Then, when he had finished, he went and leant on the cage of the watchlight and gazed abstractedly on the ocean. In the meantime, a number of the sailors of the Nautilus, all strong and healthy men, had come up onto the platform. They came to draw up the nets that had been laid all night. These sailors were evidently of different nations, although the European type was visible in all of them. I recognized some unmistakable Irishmen, Frenchmen from the Sclaves, and a Greek or a Candiote. They were civil and only used that odd language among themselves, the origin of which I could not guess, neither could I question them. The nets were hauled in. They were a large kind of chalut, like those on the Normandy coasts, great pockets that the waves and the Teign fixed in the smaller meshes kept open. These pockets, drawn by iron poles, swept through the water and gathered in everything in their way. That day they brought up curious specimens from those productive coasts. I reckoned that the haul had brought in more than 900 weight of fish. It was a fine haul, but not to be wondered at. Indeed, the nets are let down for several hours and enclose in their meshes an infinite variety. We had no lack of excellent food, and the rapidity of the Nautilus and the attraction of the electric light could always renew our supply. These several productions of the sea were immediately lowered through the panel to the steward's room, some to be eaten fresh and others pickled. The fishing ended and the provision of air renewed. I thought that the Nautilus was about to continue its submarine excursion and was preparing to return to my room when, without further preamble, the captain turned to me, saying, "Professor, is not this ocean gifted with real life? It has its tempers and its gentle moods. Yesterday it slept as we did, and now it has woke after a quiet night. Look," he continued, "it wakes under the caresses of the sun. It is going to renew its diurnal existence. It is an interesting study to watch the play of its organization. It has a pulse, arteries, spasms, and I agree with the learned Maury, who discovered it in a circulation as real as the circulation of blood in animals. Yes, the ocean has indeed circulation, and to promote it, the Creator has caused things to multiply in it, caloric, salt, and animal polate." When Captain Nemo spoke thus, he seemed altogether changed and aroused an extraordinary emotion in me. "Also," he added, "true existence is there, and I can imagine the foundations of this nautical towns, clusters of submarine houses which, like the Nautilus, would ascend every morning to breathe at the surface of the water, free towns, independent cities. Yet, who knows whether some despot—" Captain Nemo finished his sentence with a violent gesture. Then, addressing me as if to chase away some sorrowful thought, "Monsieur Aronnax," he asked, "do you know the depth of the ocean?" "I only know, Captain, what the principal soundings have taught us." "Could you tell me, then, so that I can suit them to my purpose?" "These are some," I replied, "that I remember. If I am not mistaken, a depth of 8,000 yards has been found in the North Atlantic and 2,500 yards in the Mediterranean. The most remarkable soundings have been made in the South Atlantic near the 35th parallel, and they gave 12,000 yards, 14,000 yards, and 15,000 yards. To sum up all, it is reckoned that if the bottom of the sea were leveled, its mean depth would be about 1 3/4 leagues." "Well, Professor," replied the captain, "we shall show you better than that, I hope. As to the mean depth of this part of the Pacific, I tell you it is only 4,000 yards. So 1 3/4 leagues. Remember, 1 league I'm estimating as 3 miles, so that's probably about 5 miles. That's quite a depth, 5 miles depth. Having said this, Captain Nemo went toward the panel and disappeared down the ladder. I followed him and went into the large drawing room. The screw was immediately put in motion, and the log gave 20 miles an hour. During the days and weeks that passed, Captain Nemo was very sparing of his visits. I seldom saw him. The lieutenant pricked the ship's course regularly on the chart, so I could always tell exactly the route of the Nautilus. Nearly every day for some time the panels of the drawing room were opened, and we were never tired of penetrating the mysteries of the submarine world. The general direction of the Nautilus was southeast, and it kept between 100 and 150 yards of depth. One day, however, I do not know why, being drawn diagonally by means of the inclined planes, it touched the bed of the sea. The thermometer indicated a temperature of 4.25 cents, centigrade, a temperature that at this depth seemed common to all latitudes. At 3 o'clock in the morning of the 26th of November, the Nautilus crossed the Tropic of Cancer at 172 degrees longitude. On the 27th instant, it sighted the Sandwich Islands, where Cook died, February 14th, 1779. We had then gone 4,860 leagues from our starting point. In the morning, when I went on the platform, I saw 2 miles to windward Hawaii, the largest of the 7 islands that form the group. I saw clearly the cultivated ranges and several mountain chains that run parallel with the side, and the volcanoes that overtop Mauna Kea, which rise 5,000 yards above the level of the sea. Besides other things, the nets brought up were several flabellariae and graceful pulpi that are peculiar to that part of the ocean. The direction of the Nautilus was still to the southeast. It crossed the equator December 1st at 142 degrees longitude, and on the 4th of the same month, after crossing rapidly and without anything in particular occurring, we sighted the Marquesas group. I saw 3 miles off Martin's Peak in Nuka Hiva, the largest of the group that belongs to France. I only saw the woody mountains against the horizon because Captain Nemo did not wish to bring the ship to the wind. There the nets brought up beautiful specimens of fish, some with azure fins and tails like gold, the flesh of which is unrivaled, some nearly destitute of scales, but of exquisite flavor. Others with bony jaws and yellow-tinged gills, as good as bonitos, all fish that would be of use to us. After leaving these charming islands, protected by the French flag, from the 4th to the 11th of December, the Nautilus sailed over about 2,000 miles. During the daytime of the 11th of December, I was busy reading in the large drawing room. Ned Land and Conseil watched the luminous water through the half-open panels. The Nautilus was immovable. While its reservoirs were filled up, I think it was trying to say immobile and immovable at the same time, and so it came out as a gerbil. So sorry about that. While its reservoirs were filled, it kept at a depth of 1,000 yards, a region rarely visited in the ocean, and in which large fish were seldom seen. I was then reading a charming book by Jean Mace, The Slaves of the Stomach, and I was learning some valuable lessons from it when Conseil interrupted me. "Will Master come here a moment?" he said in a curious voice. "What is the matter, Conseil?" "I want Master to look." I rose, went, and leaned on my elbows before the panes and watched. In a full electric light, an enormous black mass, quite immovable, was suspended in the midst of the waters. I watched it attentively, seeking to find out the nature of this gigantic cetacean. But a sudden thought crossed my mind. "A vessel," I said, half aloud. "Yes," replied the Canadian, "a disabled ship that has sunk perpendicularly." Ned Land was right. We were close to a vessel of which the tattered shrouds still hung from their chains. The keel seemed to be in good order, and it had been wrecked at most some few hours. 3 stumps of mast broke off about 2 feet above the bridge, showed that the vessel had to sacrifice its masts, but lying on its side it had filled and it was heeling over to port. This skeleton of what had once been was a sad spectacle as it lay lost under the waves, but sadder still was the sight of the bridge, where some corpses bound with ropes were still lying. I counted 4 men, one of whom was standing at the helm, and a woman standing by the poop, holding an infant in her arms. She was quite young. I could distinguish her features, which the water had not decomposed, by the brilliant light from the Nautilus. In one despairing effort, she had raised her infant above her head, poor little thing, whose arms encircled its mother's neck. The attitude of the four sailors was frightful, distorted as they were by their convulsive movements, whilst making a last effort to free themselves from the cords that bound them to the vessel. The steersman alone, calm, with a grave, clear face, his gray hair glued to his forehead, and his hand clutching the wheel of the helm, seemed even then to be guiding the three broken masts through the depths of the ocean. What a scene! We were dumb. Our hearts beat fast before this shipwreck, taken as if it were from life and photographed in its last moments. And I saw already coming towards it with hungry eyes enormous sharks attracted by the human flesh. However, the Nautilus, turning, went round the submerged vessel, and in one instant I read on the stern, the Florida Sunderland. So if you live in Florida, please comment on this so that you can tell me whether or not you thought it was fair that it was named the Florida. I don't know. I just made that up. But when I was reading that, I was thinking, you know what? This is kind of like 19th century Star Trek, because here they are going in this unexplored place in this really unusual vessel that, I don't know. That's super high tech for the time. And I don't know. I just thought, maybe Captain Nemo's kind of like Picard and we're just flying on the Enterprise. So you have another picture to show us?
I think it's invisible.
Oh, here, let me get this. Okay, so Kimmy's going to show us the picture again. Hopefully you can see that. There's the cat. And this is based on the Egyptian cat. The name of the goddess is Bastet. So anyway, she's working on pictures for a book. All right, so and let's keep going. We're on chapter 18, Vanikoro. This terrible spectacle was the forerunner of a series of maritime catastrophes that the Nautilus was destined to meet with in its route. As long as it went through more frequented waters, we often saw the hulls of shipwrecked vessels that were rotting in the depths, and deeper down, cannons, bullets, anchors, chains, and 1,000 other iron materials eaten up by rust. However, on the 11th of December, we sighted the Pomotou Islands, the old dangerous group of Bougainville that extended over a space of 500 leagues at east-southeast to west-northwest from the island Douchy to that of Lazareff. I'm sorry if I pronounced those incorrectly. Probably offended some people that live on those islands, so I'm sorry about that. This group covers an area of 370 square leagues, and it is formed of 60 groups of islands, among which the Gambier group is remarkable, over which France exercises sway. These are coral islands, slowly raised but continuous, created by the daily work of Pulpy. Then this new island will be joined later on to the neighboring groups, and the fifth continent will stretch from New Zealand and New Caledonia, and from thence to the Marquesas. One day, when I was suggesting this theory to Captain Nemo, he replied coldly, "The Earth does not want new continents, but new men." Clarence had conducted the Nautilus toward the island of Clermont-Tonnerre, one of the most curious of the group that was discovered in 1822 by Captain Bell of the Minerva. I could study now the madreporal system to which are due the islands in this ocean. Madrepores, which must not be mistaken for corals, have a tissue lined with calcareous crust, and the modifications of its structure have induced Monsieur Milne Edwards, my worthy master, to class them into 5 sections. The animalcule that the marine polypus secretes live by millions at the bottom of their cells. The calcareous deposits become rocks, reefs, and large and small islands. Here they form a ring surrounding a little inland lake that communicates with the sea by means of gaps. There they make barriers of reefs like those in the coasts of New Caledonia and the various Paumotan Islands. In other places, like those at Reunion and at Maurice, they raise fringed reefs, high, straight walls near which the depth of the ocean is considerable. Some cable lengths off the shores of the islands of Clermont, I admired the gigantic work accomplished by these microscopical workers. These walls are specially the work of those madrepores known as millepores, porites, madrepores, and astraeus. These pulpi are found particularly in the rough beds of the sea near the surface, and consequently it is from the upper part that they begin their operations, in which they bury themselves by degrees with the debris of the secretions that support them. Such is at least Darwin's theory, who thus explains the formation of the atolls, a superior theory to my mind to that given of the foundation of the madreporical works, summits of mountains, or volcanoes that are submerged some feet below the level of the sea. I could observe closely these curious walls, for perpendicularly they were more than 300 yards deep, and our electric sheets lighted up this calcareous matter brilliantly. Replying to a question Consul asked me as to the time these colossal barriers took to be raised, I astonished him much by telling him that the learned men reckoned it about the 1/8 of an inch in 100 years. Toward evening, Clermont-Tonnerre was lost in the distance, and the route of the Nautilus was sensibly changed. After having crossed the Tropic of Capricorn in 135 degrees longitude, it sailed west-northwest, making again for the tropical zone. Although the summer sun was very strong, we did not suffer from heat, for at 15 or 20 fathoms below the surface, the temperature did not rise from 10 to 12 degrees. On the 15th of December, we left to the east the bewitching group of the Societies and the graceful Tahiti, Queen of the Pacific. I saw in the morning, some miles to the windward, the elevated summits of the island. These waters furnished our table with excellent fish, mackerel, bonitos, and some varieties of sea serpent. On the 25th of December, the Nautilus sailed into the midst of the New Hebrides, discovered by Quiros in 1606, and that of Bougainville, explored in 1768, and to which Cook gave its present name in 1773. This group is composed principally of 9 large islands that form a band of 120 leagues north-south and south-southwest, that doesn't make sense, between 15 degrees and 2 degrees south latitude and 164 degrees and 168 degrees longitude. We passed tolerably near to the island of Aru, that at noon looked like a mass of green wood surmounted by a peak of great height. That day being Christmas Day, Ned Land seemed to regret sorely the non-celebration of Christmas, the family fete of which Protestants are so fond. I had not seen Captain Nemo for a week, when, on the morning of the 27th, he came into the large drawing room, always seeming as if he had seen you 5 minutes before. I was busily tracing the route of the Nautilus on the planisphere. The captain came up to me, put his finger on one spot on the chart, and said this single word, Vanikoro. The effect was magical. It was the name of the islands on which La Pérouse had been lost. I rose suddenly. The Nautilus has brought us to Vanikoro? I asked. Yes, Professor, said the captain, and I can visit the celebrated islands where the Boussole and the Astrolabe struck? If you like, Professor. When shall we be there? We're there now. Followed by Captain Nemo, I went up to the platform and greedily scanned to the horizon. To the northeast, two volcanic islands emerged of unequal size, surrounded by a coral reef that measured 40 miles in circumference. We were close to Vanikoro, really the one to which Dumont d'Urville gave the name of Ile de la Recherche, and exactly facing the little harbor of Vanu, situated at 16 degrees 4 minutes south latitude and 164 degrees 32 minutes east longitude. The earth seemed covered with verdure from the shore of the summits in the interior, and were crowned by Mount Kapogo, 476 feet high. The Nautilus, having passed the outer belt of rocks by a narrow strait, found itself among breakers where the sea was from 30 to 40 fathoms deep. Under the verdant shade of some mangroves, I perceived some savages who appeared greatly surprised at our approach. In the long black body moving between wind and water, did they not see some formidable cetacean that they regarded with suspicion? Just then Captain Nemo asked me what I knew about the wreck of La Perouse. "Only what everyone knows, Captain," I replied. "And could you tell me what everyone knows about it?" he inquired ironically. "Easily." I related to him that all the last words of Dumont d'Urville had made known, works from which the following is a brief account. La Perouse and his second, Captain de Langle, were sent by Louis XVI in 1785 on a voyage of circumnavigating. They embarked in the corvette Boussole and the Astrolabe, neither of which were again heard of. In 1791, the French government, justly uneasy as to the fate of these two sloops, managed two large merchantmen, the Recherche and the Espérance, which left Brest at the 28th of September under the command of Bruni d'Entrecasteaux. 2 months after, they learned from Bowen, commander of the Albemarle, that the debris of shipwrecked vessels had been seen on the coast of New Georgia. But d'Entrecasteaux, ignoring this communication, rather uncertain, besides, directed his course towards the Admiralty Islands, mentioned in a report of Captain Hunter's as being the place where La Perouse was wrecked. They sought in vain. The Espérance and the Recherche passed before Vanikoro without stopping there, and in fact this voyage was most disastrous, as it cost d'Entrecasteaux his life, and those of 2 of his lieutenants, besides several of his crew. Captain Dillo, a shrewd old Pacific sailor, was the first to find unmistakable traces of the wrecks. On the 15th of May, 1824, his vessel, the St. Patrick, passed close to Tikopia, one of the New Hebrides. There a Lascar came alongside in a canoe, sold him the handle of a sword in silver that bore the print of characters engraved on the hilt. The Lascar pretended that 6 years before, during a stay at Vanikoro, he had seen 2 Europeans that belonged to some vessels that had run aground on the reefs some years ago. Dillon guessed that he meant La Perouse, whose disappearance had troubled the whole world. He tried to get on to Vanikoro, where, according to the Lascar, he would find numerous debris of the wreck, but winds and tides prevented him. Dillon returned to Calcutta. There he interested the Asiatic Society and the Indian Company in his discovery. A vessel to which was given the name of the Recherche was put at his disposal, and he set out 23rd of January, 1827, accompanied by a French agent. The Recherche, after touching at several points in the Pacific, cast anchor before Vanikoro, 7th of July, 1827, in that same harbor of Vanu where the Nautilus was at this time. There it collected numerous relics of the wreck, iron utensils, anchors, pulley strops, swivel guns, an 18-pound shot, fragments of astronomical instruments, a piece of crown work, and a bronze clock bearing this inscription, Bazin Maffei, the mark of the foundry of the arsenal at Brest about 1785. There could be no further doubt. Dillon, having made all inquiries, stayed in the unlucky place till October. Then he quitted Vanikoro and directed his course toward New Zealand, put into Calcutta 7th of April, 1828, and returned to France, where he was warmly welcomed by Charles Dix. But at the same time, without knowing Dillon's movements, Dumont d'Urville had already set out to find the scene of the wreck, and they had learned from a whaler that some medals and a cross of St. Louis had been found in the hands of some savages of Louisade and New Caledonia. Dumont d'Urville, commander of the Astrolabe, had then sailed, and 2 months after Dillon had left Vanikoro, he put into Hobart Town. There he learned the results of the Dillon's inquiries, and found that a certain James Hobbs, second lieutenant of the Union of Calcutta, after landing on an island situated 8 degrees 18 minutes south latitude and 156 degrees 30 minutes east longitude, had seen some iron bars and red stuffs used by the natives of these parts. Dumont d'Urville, much perplexed and not knowing how to credit the reporters of low-class journals, decided to follow Dillon's tracks. On the 10th of February, 1828, the Astrolabe appeared off Tikopia and took as guide and interpreter a deserter found on the island, made his way to Vanikoro, sighted it on the 12th lay among the reefs until the 14th, and not until the 20th did he cast anchor within the barrier in the harbor of Vanu. On the 23rd, several officers went round the island and brought back some unimportant trifles. The natives, adopting a system of denials and evasions, refused to take them to the unlucky place. This ambiguous conduct led them to believe that the natives had ill-treated the castaways, and indeed they seemed to fear that Dumont d'Urville had come to avenge La Pérouse and his unfortunate crew. However, on the 26th of February, appeased by some presents and understanding that they had no reprisals to fear, they led Monsieur Jacquereau to the scene of the wreck. There, in 3 or 4 fathoms of water, between the reefs of Pacou and Vanu, lay anchors, cannons, pigs of lead and iron embedded in the limy concretions. The large boat and the whaler belonging to the Astrolabe were sent to this place, and not without some difficulty their crews hauled up an anchor weighing 1,800 pounds, a brass gun, some pigs of iron, and 2 copper swivel guns. Dumont d'Urville questioned the natives, learned too that La Pérouse, after losing both his vessels on the reefs of this island, had constructed a smaller boat, only to be lost a second time. Where? No one knew. But the French government, fearing that Dumont d'Urville was not acquainted with Dillon's movements, had sent the sloop Bayonnaise, commanded by Legoarant de Tromelin, to Vanikoro, which had been stationed on the west coast of America. The Bayonnaise cast her anchor before Vanikoro some months after the departure of the Astrolabe, but found no new document, but stated that the savages had respected the monument to La Pérouse. That is the substance of what I told Captain Nemo. So, he said, no one knows now where the 3rd vessel perished that was constructed by the castaways on the island of Vanikoro. No one knows. Captain Nemo said nothing, but signed to me to follow him into the large salon. The Nautilus sank several yards below the waves, and the panels were opened. I hastened to the aperture, and under the crustaceans of coral covered with fungi, Sulfonulus, alcyons, madrepores, through myriads of charming fish, Gyrellus, Glyphisidri, a bunch of other stuff that I can't pronounce. I recognized certain debris that the drags had not been able to tear up. Iron stirrups, anchors, cannons, bullets, capstan fittings, the stem of a ship, all objects clearly proving the wreck of some vessel, and now carpeted with living flowers. While I was looking on this desolate scene, Captain Nemo said in a sad voice, Commander La Pérouse set out on 7th December 1785 with his vessels La Boussole and the Astrolabe. He first cast an anchor at Botany Bay, visited the Friendly Isles, New Caledonia, then directed his course towards Santa Cruz and put into Namuka, one of the Hapai group. Then his vessels struck on the unknown reefs of Vanikoro. The Boussole, which went first, ran aground on the southerly coast. The Astrolabe went to its help and ran aground too. The first vessel was destroyed almost immediately. The second, stranded under the wind, resisted some days. The natives made the castaways welcome. They installed themselves in the island and constructed a smaller boat with the debris of the two large ones. Some sailors stayed willingly at Vanikoro. The others, weak and ill, set out with La Pérouse. They directed their course toward the Solomon Islands and there perished with everything on the westerly coast of the chief island of the group, between Cape Deception and Satisfaction. How do you know that? By this that I found on the spot where was last the wreck. Captain Nemo showed me a tin plate box stamped with the French arms and corroded by salt water. He opened it, and I saw a bundle of papers, yellow but still readable. They were the instructions of the naval minister to Commander La Pérouse, annotated in the margin of Louis XVI's handwriting. Ah, it is a fine death for a sailor, said Captain Nemo at last. A coral tomb makes a quiet grave, and I trust that I and my comrades will find no other. And chapter 19 is the Torres Straits. The first word is during, and Kimberly is going to show us the updated version of Bastet. Here she is.
I'm pretty sure you can see it better this time.
So this is more like what you might see if you're looking at an Egyptian book that has a picture. This statue is a pretty common relic that they find in Egypt because cats are really important in agriculture because they chased mice away from all the grain that they were storing when they harvested. So that's the reason why cats were so important in ancient Egypt. So thank you for your drawing. Who wants to read one more chapter tonight? We've got chapter 19, which I already forgot what it was called. I'm trying to load it back up. Here it is, the Torres Straits. Okay, here we go. During the night of the 27th or 28th of December, the Nautilus left the shores of Vanikoro with great speed. Her course was southwesterly, and in 3 days she had gone over the 750 leagues that separated it from La Pérouse group and the southeast point of Papua. Early on the 1st of January 1863, Consul joined me on the platform. Master, will you permit me to wish you a happy new year? What? Consul, exactly as if I was at Paris in my study at the Jardin des Plantes? Well, I accept your good wishes and thank you for them. Only, I will ask you what you mean by a happy new year under our circumstances. Do you mean the year that will bring us to the end of our imprisonment, or the year that sees us continue this strange voyage? Really, I do not know how to answer, Master. We are sure to see curious things, and for the last 2 months we have not had time for dullness. The last marvel is always the most astonishing, and if we continue this progression, I do not know how it will end. It is my opinion that we shall never again see the like. I think then, with no offense to Master, that a happy year would be one in which we would see everything. On the 2nd of January, we had made 11,340 miles, or 5,250 French leagues. So you can do the math. That's a little over 2 miles to a league, and in that measurement. So I think the reason why nobody does leagues is because they never settled on a specific length. Since our starting point in the Japan seas, before the ship's head stretched the dangerous shores of the Coral Sea on the northeast coast of Australia, our boat lay along some miles from the redoubtable bank on which Cook's vessel was lost, 10th of June, 1770. The boat in which Cook was struck on a rock, and if it did not sink, it was owing to a piece of coral that was broken by the shock and fixed itself in the broken keel. I had wished to visit the reef 360 leagues long, against which the sea, always rough, broke with great violence, with the noise like thunder. But just then the inclined planes drew the Nautilus down to a great depth, and I could see nothing of the high coral walls. I had to content myself with the different specimens of fish brought up by the nets. I remarked, among others, some Germans, not the country, some Germans, a species of mackerel as large as a tuna, with bluish sides and striped with transverse bands that disappear with the animal's life. These fish followed us in shoals and furnished us with a very delicate food. We took also a large number of gilt heads, about 1½ inches long, tasting like dories, and flying pyropeds like submarine swallows, which in dark nights light alternately the air and water with their phosphorescent light. Among the mollusks and zoophytes, I found in the meshes of the net several specimens of alchironarians, echini, hammers, spurs, dials, cerites, and halea. The floral was represented by beautiful floating seaweeds, laminaria, and macrochycites, impregnated with the mucilage that transudes through their pores, and among which I gathered an admirable Nemastoma gelinarius that was classed among the natural curiosities of the museum. 2 days after crossing the Coral Sea, 4th of January, we sighted the Papuan coasts. On this occasion, Captain Nemo informed me that his intention was to get into the Indian Ocean by the Strait of Torres. His communication ended there. The Torres Straits are nearly 34 leagues wide, but they are obstructed by an innumerable quantity of islands, islets, breakers, and rocks that make its navigation almost impracticable, so that Captain Nemo took all needful precautions to cross them. The Nautilus, floating betwixt wind and water, went at a moderate pace. Her screw, like a cetacean's tail, beat the waves slowly. Profiting by this, I and my 2 companions went up on to the deserted platform. Before us was the steersman's cage, and I expected that Captain Nemo was there directing the course of the Nautilus. I had before me the excellent charts of the Straits of Torres, and I consulted them attentively. Round the Nautilus, the sea dashed furiously. The course of the waves that went from southeast to northwest at the rate of 2½ miles broke on the coral that showed itself here and there. "This is a bad sea," remarked Ned Land. "Detestable indeed, and one that does not suit a boat like the Nautilus. The captain must be very sure of his route, for I see there pieces of coral that would do for its keel if it only touched them slightly." Indeed, the situation was dangerous, but the Nautilus seemed to slide like magic off these rocks. It did not follow the routes of the Astrolabe and the Zélé exactly, for they proved fatal to Dumont d'Urville. It bore more northwards, coasted the islands of Murray, and came back to the southwest towards Cumberland Passage. I thought it was going to pass by, when, going back to the northwest, it went through a large quantity of islands and islets little known toward the Island Sound and Canal Mauvais. I wondered if Captain Nemo, foolishly imprudent, would steer his vessel into that pass where Dumont d'Urville's 2 corvettes touched, when swerving again and cutting straight through to the west, he steered for the island of Gilboa. It was then 3 in the afternoon. The tide began to recede, being quite full. The Nautilus approached the island that I still saw with its remarkable border of screw pines. He stood off it about 2 miles distant. Suddenly a shock overthrew me. The Nautilus just touched a rock and stayed immovable, laying lightly to port side. When I rose, I perceived Captain Nemo and his lieutenant on the platform. They were examining the situation of the vessel and exchanging words in their incomprehensible dialect. She was situated thus. 2 miles on the starboard side appeared Gilboa, stretching from north to west like an immense arm. Towards the south and east, some coral showed itself, left by the ebb. We had run aground, and in one of those seas where the tides are middling, a sorry matter for the floating of the Nautilus. However, the vessel had not suffered, for her keel was solidly joined. But if she could neither glide off nor move, she ran the risk of being forever fastened to these rocks, and then Captain Nemo's submarine vessel would be done for. I was reflecting thus when the captain, cool and calm, always master of himself, approached me. An accident? I asked. No, an incident. But an incident that will oblige you, perhaps, to become an inhabitant of this land from which you flee? Captain Nemo looked at me curiously and made a negative gesture, as much as to say that nothing would force him to set foot on terra firma again. Then he said, besides, Monsieur Aronnax, the Nautilus is not lost. It will carry you yet into the midst of the marvels of the ocean. Our voyage is only begun, and I do not wish to be deprived so soon of the honor of your company. However, Captain Nemo, I replied, without noticing the ironical turn of this phrase, the Nautilus ran aground in open sea. Now the tides are not strong in the Pacific, and if you cannot lighten the Nautilus, I do not see how it will be reinflated. The tides are not strong in the Pacific. You're right there, Professor. But in the Torres Straits, one finds still a difference of 1.5 yards between the level of high and low seas. Today is the 4th of January, and in 5 days the moon will be full. Now I shall be very much astonished if that satellite does not raise these masses of water sufficiently and render me a service that I should be indebted to her for. Having said this, Captain Nemo, followed by his lieutenant, redescended to the interior of the Nautilus. As to the vessel, it moved not and was immovable, as if the coralline pulpi had already walled it up with their indestructible cement. Well, sir, said Ned Land, who came up to me after the departure of the captain. Well, friend Ned, we will wait patiently for the tide on the 9th instant, for it appears that the moon will have the goodness to put it off again. Really. And this captain is not going to cast anchor at all, since the tide will suffice, said Consul simply. The Canadian looked at Consul, then shrugged his shoulders. Sir, you may believe me when I tell you that this piece of iron will navigate neither on nor under the sea again. It is only fit to be sold for its weight. I think, therefore, that the time has come to part company with Captain Nemo. Friend Ned, I do not despair of this stout Nautilus as you do, and in 4 days we shall know what to hold to on the Pacific tides. Besides, flight might be possible if we were in sight of the English or Provençal coast, but on the Papuan shores it's another thing, and it will be time enough to come to that extremity if the Nautilus does not recover itself again, which I look upon as a grave event. But do they know at least how to act circumspectly? There is an island. On that island there are trees. Under those trees, terrestrial animals, bearers of cutlets and roast beef, to which I would willingly give a trial. In this friend Ned is right, said Consul, and I agree with him. Could not master obtain permission from his friend Captain Nemo to put us on land, if only so as not to lose the habit of treading on the solid parts of the planet? I can ask him, but he will refuse. Will Master risk it? Asked Consul, and we shall know how to rely upon the captain's amiability. To my great surprise, Captain Nemo gave me the permission I asked for, and he gave it very agreeably, without even exacting from me a promise to return to the vessel, but flight across New Guinea might be very perilous, and I should not have counseled Ned Land to attempt it. Better to be a prisoner on board the Nautilus than to fall into the hands of the natives. At 8 o'clock, armed with guns and hatchets, we got off the Nautilus. The sea was pretty calm. A slight breeze blew on the land, Consul and I rowing. We sped along quickly, and Ned steered in the straight passage that the breakers left between them. The boat was well handled and moved rapidly. Ned Land could not restrain his joy. He was like a prisoner that had escaped from prison and knew not that it was necessary to re-enter it. Meat! We are going to eat some meat. And what meat? He replied. Real game, no bread indeed. I do not say that fish is not good. We must not abuse it, but a piece of fresh venison grilled on live coals will agreeably vary our ordinary course. Glutton, said Consul. He makes my mouth water. It remains to be seen, I said, if these forests are full of game, and if the game is not such as will hunt the hunter himself. Well said, Monsieur Aronnax, replied the Canadian, whose teeth seemed sharpened like the edge of a hatchet. But I will eat loin of tiger, if there is no other quadruped on this island. Friend Ned is uneasy about it, said Consul. Whatever it may be, continued Ned Land, every animal with 4 paws without feathers or with 2 paws without feathers will be saluted by my first shot. Very well, Master Land's imprudence are beginning. Never fear, Monsieur Aronnax, replied the Canadian. I do not want 25 minutes to offer you a dish of my sort. At 8:30, the Nautilus boat ran softly aground on a heavy sand after having happily passed the coral reef that surrounds the island of Gilboa. That's the end of chapter 19. Chapter 20 is called A Few Days on Land, and the first word is I, and I think that's where we're going to end it for today. So, I hope you're enjoying this story. I see we do have one person on. Oh, Rebecca. Hi, Rebecca. I see you're there. That's great. I'm glad to see you. So I'm going to wait just a couple of minutes. So I think that I'm absolutely sure that in chapter 18, the history story that they gave you, I'm sure is an absolutely as accurate as Jules Verne was able to recount it, story of those ships and that captain, D'Urville, what was his first name? I can't remember his name, but I'm sure that it's an accurate story because these kind of books, they were accurate with their historical facts. If you read this, or if you read The Three Musketeers, or if you read Les Miserables, or if you read Crime and Punishment, or anything by Charles Dickens, the historical facts, I mean, yeah, of course, the story is make-believe. Historical facts are accurate. So that you can count on. He did his homework and everything is right. So with that, I'm going to bid you adieu, and I hope that you have a good evening and get your studying done tonight so that you can get your good grades that I know you want to get. So God bless you. Have a good night, and we will see you again tomorrow when we read another part of the story. God bless. Good night.